Think about how we spend decades dreaming of retirement. We picture that ultimate freedom, the perfectly quiet mornings, the trips we'll finally take, the hobbies we finally have the time to master. After 40 years of grinding it out, retirement isn't just a financial goal anymore. It becomes a promise. A promise that one day, the heavy lifting will end and your life will finally belong entirely to you. But for millions of grandparents out there, that simply isn't what happened. Right when that golden chapter was supposed to start, life asked for something totally unexpected. A daughter struggling to make ends meet, a son working crushing hours, a family crisis no one saw coming, or a grandchild who suddenly just needed someone. And without a big discussion, without any fanfare, and honestly, without fully realizing what they were giving up, so many grandparents quietly step right back into one of the most exhausting roles a human being can take on: raising a child. Again. Not at 25, not at 30, but at 62, 68, sometimes even older. Society has a very specific way of talking about people who do this. We call them selfless, sacrificial, generous. And while every single one of those words is true, they also hide something really important. Because when we hear the word sacrifice, we immediately think of loss. We think about everything these grandparents gave up: the travel plans, the total freedom, the deep rest they had so genuinely earned. But what if that isn't the whole story? What if these grandparents actually gained something that traditional retirement could never, ever have provided? To really get this, we have to look at the retirement they originally pictured. For years, maybe decades, they envisioned what life would be like when the alarm clock finally stopped ringing. Maybe it was traveling. Maybe it was fishing, tending to a garden, or just sitting there drinking a morning coffee without having to rush anywhere. For the very first time in their lives, their time was going to be theirs alone. And for a little while, maybe it was. Then the phone rang. A difficult conversation happened. And the sudden, heavy realization set in. Someone in the family needed help. Not next month, not next year, but right now. Sometimes it's because of a messy divorce, sudden illness, or a brutal financial hit. Sometimes it's just because modern life has become incredibly hard for young parents to navigate alone. The cost of childcare skyrockets, work hours bleed into the night, and families are stretched thinner than ever before. And in countless homes across the world, grandparents became the quiet safety net holding everything together. What's truly remarkable here isn't just that they helped. Families have always helped families. What is breathtaking is how often they stepped right back into a role that society told them they had already finished. The school drop-offs, the homework battles, the bedtime routines, the doctor's appointments and parent-teacher conferences, the heavy responsibilities they thought were left firmly in their past suddenly became the absolute center of their future. And if you actually sit down and ask these grandparents about those years, they'll often tell you something that might surprise you. Yes, they were exhausting, but they were also profoundly, deeply meaningful. That specific combination absolutely fascinates psychologists. See, our modern world assumes that happiness equals having fewer responsibilities. But human beings are so much more complicated than that. The renowned psychiatrist Viktor Frankl spent his life studying what gives people the strength to survive hard things, and his conclusion was beautifully simple. We need meaning just as much as we need comfort. In fact, we might need it even more. And traditional retirement? It actually creates a hidden challenge. It gives you comfort, sure, but it doesn't automatically hand you meaning. For so many people, a job was never just a paycheck. It was structure. It was a sense of purpose. It was responsibility and identity. People needed you. People depended on you. Then retirement hits, and almost overnight, that vanishes. Researchers consistently find that people struggle deeply with this transition, not because resting is bad, but because purpose is vastly harder to replace than we think. This is exactly where the story of these grandparents becomes so incredibly beautiful. While millions of retirees were wandering around, trying to figure out what would give their days meaning, these grandparents never had to search. Meaning walked right up to their front door, carrying a little backpack. Every single morning, someone needed them. Not in theory, not symbolically, but actually. A child was counting on them. A child was waiting for them. A child trusted them with their whole world. And let me tell you, that fundamentally changes the way a human being experiences life. Purpose is a hard thing to measure, but we all know exactly what it feels like. It's that deep, grounding feeling that your presence truly matters, that if you weren't there tomorrow, something vital would be missing. Grandparents raising grandkids feel that in their bones every single day, and that feeling is pure power. But purpose is only half the story. Something else was happening too. Many of these grandparents realized they were getting to experience childhood from an entirely new vantage point. Think about it. When they were raising their own kids, life was a blur. It was a race of careers, massive bills, mortgages, and endless stress. They loved their kids fiercely, but they were exhausted, busy, and distracted, just like most young parents are. Then, decades later, they find themselves sitting across the kitchen table from a grandchild, and suddenly, they notice all the magic they once had to rush right past. The endless questions, the little stories, the pure laughter, the tiny, ordinary moments that don't seem like much until you look back decades later and realize they were the best parts of your life. So many grandparents call this a second chance, not because they regret how they parented the first time, but because they finally have the quiet perspective to savor the moments they were just too overwhelmed to feel the first time around. A simple walk to school became a treasure. Helping with math homework had weight. Even pouring a bowl of cereal felt meaningful. The moments themselves hadn't changed. The person living them had. And then, there is something even deeper here. Something kids rarely grasp until they grow up. The research is incredibly clear. Kids benefit immensely from strong bonds with their grandparents. They get more emotional security, a stronger sense of who they are, and a deeper feeling of belonging. But the statistics don't capture the magic. The real truth is much simpler. Children remember who showed up. They forget the toys. They forget the expensive gifts. They forget thousands of ordinary Tuesdays. But they never forget the people who were there. The ones who really listened. The ones who made the world feel safe. The ones who chose them. And that word is everything. Chose. Because eventually, these grandkids grow up and realize a profound truth. Their grandparents didn't have to do what they did. They chose to do it. They chose the 6 a.m. wake-ups. They chose the heavy responsibility. They chose the massive inconvenience. They chose the sacrifice. Not because it was the easy path, but because they believed their family was worth it. That realization alone can anchor a person for the rest of their life. Years down the line, a grown grandchild might lose the specific details, but they will never, ever forget who stood beside them when their whole world was shaking. For so many grandparents, this is the most beautiful part of the journey. The relationship didn't fade when the kid moved out. It transformed into a legacy. And honestly, legacy might be the most crucial word of all. Many folks spend their retirement desperately trying to enjoy whatever time they have left, and there is zero shame in that. But these grandparents found themselves doing something far bigger. They spent those golden years actively shaping the life of a human being who is going to carry a piece of them far into the future. Their core values, their family stories, their traditions, their hard-won lessons, and their unconditional love. It will all live on, long after they are. We love to talk about retirement as freedom from responsibility. But maybe responsibility was never the burden we thought it was. Maybe responsibility was the actual source of meaning the whole time. Now, let's be clear. This doesn't mean raising grandkids was easy. Not for a second. So many of these grandparents stared down terrifying financial pressure, bone-deep physical exhaustion, chronic stress, and a constant hum of worry. The sacrifice was incredibly real. The hurdles were real, and the dark days were very real. But so was the overwhelming purpose. So was the unbreakable connection. So was the meaning. When these grandparents look back on those deeply demanding years, they don't see a retirement that was unfairly stolen from them. They see a child who needed them. They remember the chaotic school plays, the messy birthday parties, the tearful graduations, those quiet late-night talks, thousands of fleeting, tiny moments that quietly stitched themselves into the most important memories of their entire lives. Which brings us right back to where we started. What did these grandparents, who gave up their long-awaited retirement, actually gain that a life of leisure could never have given them? For so many of them, the answer is absolute purpose. The answer is profound meaning. The answer is the quiet pride of knowing that when life asked something incredibly hard of them, they didn't blink. They showed up. And above all else, they gained the unshakable knowledge that somewhere in this world, there is a human being whose life is infinitely more beautiful simply because they were there. Society looks at grandparents raising grandkids and pities them. They say, "What a massive sacrifice." But maybe that's just the wrong word, because sacrifice means you lost something. And loss is not the defining memory here. What they remember is being deeply needed. What they remember is being completely trusted. What they remember is being there. So many people spend their golden years wandering, searching for a spark of purpose. But you? You never had to search. Your purpose was sitting right across the breakfast table from you every single morning. And decades from now, long after the cruises you never took are forgotten by time, someone is still going to remember the person who stepped up when they needed a hero the most. Not because you were obligated to, but because you chose to. Every single day. If you sacrificed your retirement to help raise your grandchildren, or if you were the child a grandparent stepped up to raise, I really want to hear your story. Tell me all about them in the comments below. I read every single one.